Dungeons and Dragons, D&D. Dungeons and Dragons, career cornerstone with computers. My stepfather Sam purchased the basic Dungeons and Dragons set for me from a hobby game store, but it was far too complex for me to grasp by myself. I struggled to understand how the game worked. It was unlike any game that I had ever played. It made no sense at all to me. I did not know that Dungeons & Dragons was a group game at first. I knew absolutely nothing about the game, but I was fascinated by it. It had deep stories, rich mythos, little miniature statues of monsters and characters, and cool-shaped dice, triangles, tetrahedrons, octagons, and the like, along with your standard, typical 6-sided dice. There were few things so complex that I did not grasp, but Dungeons & Dragons was far beyond me at first. D&D's rules were vast and went to the most minutiae of detail. There were books, yes, plural, many books providing instruction on magical items and spells, character classes and races, currencies and exchange rates, armor and weapons, equipment and animals, and an entire documented worlds to explore. Or you could create your own modules and worlds within the tapestry of Dungeons and Dragons. The game and its rules were the quintessential definition of complicated. It was exciting to me to learn in the context of fantasy. Sam heard of fantasy gaming convention in San Mateo at the Dunfay Hotel to see people playing it firsthand. He suggested we could go see them firsthand. He imagined that we might even play in the convention's gaming sessions. Upon arrival, it was evident that people had to sign up, though, beforehand to play in the games. And so we watched. I studied. I learned. Seeing the pros at the fantasy convention, playing Dungeons & Dragons, or D&D as it was called, I understood how the game was intended to be played. I returned home and I pretended to be both the dungeon master, who directs and guides the adventure world and its non-player characters, and its players, who interact within the world as it is presented by the dungeon master. It was awkward being both the dungeon master and a group of players. I knew what was coming and what the recommended solutions might be, including where all the secrets and stashes were, and where the most formidable monsters were, so they could all be avoided. In a way, I was cheating with myself by being both dungeon master, orchestrating the world and its non-player characters, while also playing as every member of the party of the player's party of adventurers. But I learned how to play the game by immersing myself in every aspect of it. Over time, I befriended an unlikely crew to play Dungeons & Dragons with me. Who were my crew? Scott Littleton, my D&D buddy. Scott Littleton was a cool dude. He had long wavy hair, rocker pants and shirts. All the girls loved him. He was the envy of most high school boys, and he made our group cool. We certainly would not have been cool without Scott Littleton. Scott was not the smartest guy, but he was honest, and he held high honor in high esteem. He was the most stable, straight shooter guy I think I may have met. Scott's mother was divorced, and his deadbeat father long gone, like mine. They, like us, had very little, if to say no, money, despite Scott working after-school jobs to help pay for food and their rent. They were impoverished. Their lifestyle drove Scott to his rocker style because his clothes could be ripped and tattered, and he could be less kempt on any given day. It was camouflage for being so poor. Scott had ambition to have his own place and not live so desperately as he was forced to do growing up. Without money, Scott decided that he would join the U.S. Army straight out of high school, and that is precisely what he did. He became a tank communications expert, aka he was a tank soldier in control of the radio and its maintenance. It was apparently a more techie role than a soldier role, but it was a frontline, first-to-die job, and Scott knew it. But he was okay with it. The Army would pay for his education after his tour of duty. Scott loved the military, so much though, that he decided to stay in and become a career soldier. Another friend, Jeff Lefferts. He was my sidekick and became eventually a programming partner and a subcontractor for contracts of games that I did. Jeff received near perfect SAT scores. He was crazy passionate about music and band, and he was naturally brilliant and very weird. He had an odd demeanor and an uneasy stare at times, and he usually sounded very conceited. Jeff was not like most people, and he was therefore not liked by many people. And there was his overwhelming Achilles heel: girls. They melted his brain on sight and left him intellectually dissolved. Jeff had a sister, Laura. He and Laura were abused by their often drunk father. He would curse at them, smack them around, and worst of all, he performed experiments on them. Jeff did not perceive the experiments as abuse, though, but rather saw them as scientific research that happened to be done on him and his sister. He was parroting his father's words. Their father was a madman who fancied himself a mad scientist who was about to crack the greatest power technology ever. He believed that electricity was the genesis of life itself, and that it could be used to manipulate the soul or spirit life force inside a person. And he imagined that he was close to generating infinite power. The secret behind all of his brilliance was Tesla's research and technology. He built many Tesla coils, including one that was 10 feet tall, constructed around massive electric company cable spindles. It generated so much power that it arced 20 feet into the air. It was dangerous. He even managed to convince the local community Gavilan College to let him demonstrate it at an exhibit, but he had to surround it with huge, vast-ranging hazard tape all around so that people would not be electrocuted just by standing near it. Jeff's father also loved gunpowder and explosives. On holidays, especially the 4th of July, he would use dynamite and craft bombs to prove how clever and powerful he was to family and neighbors. He would explode tree stumps and large objects. Trash would explode and fly into the air. Holiday explosions. That was his thing. Watch out for the shrapnel, though. Everyone was warned to hide behind barriers. Of course. Now that all may sound wild, but it was the experimentation on Jeff and Laura that was the scariest. I recall one experiment where Jeff and Laura placed their bare feet on aluminum foil that had electrodes attached to each of the 4 corners. A similar wired sheet of foil was on a bench where they placed their hands. A Tesla coil would begin charging nearby with its ominous pulsing hum as blue arcs of electricity rose in waves up a vertical rod, and then ka-flash and boom. Jeff and Laura were then allowed to step away from the foil surfaces and restore their then wild, frizzied, extended hair sticking out in every direction from the extreme electricity that had coursed through their bodies. Their auras were etched in the 2 sheets of foil. It was eerie how the foil had captured a multicolored image from their feet and hands like a photograph of something. The etches showed an energy or a distorted energy around them. Their father insisted that he had captured their aura that surrounded their soul and their body. Who knows what his mad science really did show? His ideas and research died with him from cirrhosis of the liver resulting from his lifelong excessive drinking. And what happened to Jeff? Well, Jeff fell for a gold digger later. A woman that just wanted him for his lifestyle that he might provide. He was in his early 20s when he met her. She drained Jeff of his money, even what he had saved, and she introduced him to hardcore narcotics recreationally. Jeff's genius rapidly degenerated to good enough, average intelligence at best. His career stagnated, and he was at risk of declining if he remained on his doomed course. Ultimately, penniless and addicted to illicit drugs, Jeff no longer offered value to his gold-digging girlfriend, and she left him. Jeff eventually lost everything and was so addicted to drugs that he moved in with his brother, who was also a long drug addict, in Berkeley, where they could both score drugs locally and easily and continue to be dope brothers. Another member of our Dungeons & Dragons team was Troy Morgan. He was the jock of the group. His father and his father's father were police officers, and Troy intended to become a police officer himself. Or, if not that, an officer in the Air Force. Troy dressed proper, and he made sure everyone knew that he was a man of integrity. And he was patriotic, with great respect for the military, and that he believed strongly in the rule of law. Some might have said Troy was so rigid that he had a stick up his butt. Well, Troy would eventually join the police force in Los Angeles, California, after attending UCLA and finishing its Regional Officers Training Corps, ROTC, program. I recall one of the most jarring things for Troy that made clear to him that being a police officer was the right choice instead of joining the Air Force, as he imagined he might do. The military in ROTC made him kill a chicken with a pocket knife. It was to desensitize him from life so that he could focus on his duty. He wanted honor and integrity to extend to all living things, not just the ones that he was directed to protect. And so he decided that being a police officer was preferable to being a murderous soldier that was to just to kill chickens for training. Troy eventually joined the LA Police Department after attending that chicken-killing ROTC program. Another person in our team was Francisco Carvalho, aka Frank. He was the son of a first-generation immigrant family from Chile. He and his family had the strongest work ethic that I had ever seen, outside of my own, of course. Francisco agreed to be called Frank, but he always preferred his birth name of Francisco. He was the most loyal of friends that anyone could imagine. Frank and I were close friends throughout high school years and well into young adulthood. He even received music credits in some of the games that I did. I believe Frank was a frustrated homosexual man, though. In that era, it was scary for anyone to come out. He never did. His persuasion resulted in fun and interesting Dungeons & Dragons episodes, I have to say. And there were moments that he would instigate for fun. I suspect Frank was experimenting in the only safe place that he had, with his friends in a fantasy gaming setting. Francisco worked with his mother to grow their home cleaning business and expanded it to include a contract cleaning of the California coast, Santa Cruz to Half Moon Bay, porta potties. Francisco would eventually become, after all of that, a medical supply and equipment sales rep at a company called Medco. I never heard from Francisco again. And then there was Edward Strusenberg, aka Snit. Edward was the perfect living stereotype of a nerd. He was scrawny, long-nosed, squinty-eyed, and he wore glasses. He liked tight pants and polo shirts. He wore bright-colored sneakers. Snit was a character, as they say, or an odd cat. But he loved games with a passion, like no other. He lived for games. Snit's father collected weapons, real weapons, and lots of weapons. He had a secret room that Snit opened regularly for us. It was not so secret to us. that contained 3 walls stacked to the ceiling with mounted rifles, pistols, bows, crossbows, axes, sabers, swords, and even medieval shields. Snit's father's secret room was a fantasy treasure trove. I marveled at all the artifacts and was so thrilled to hold a real battle axe and crossbow. Snit said his father would freak out if we touched his guns. But otherwise, we could safely explore. I doubt that Snit's father would have approved of any of our intrusion and fingering his collection, but it was awesome. Snit would become an undercover police officer later in life for the San Jose Police Department, specializing in narcotics, the very same division that Troy's father worked in, as fate would play out. Tragically, however, a different fate would also befall Snit. He was murdered while undercover during a sting operation. And then we had the guests. Throughout the years, our core party of adventurers, our players, would invite friends. Amazingly, even an occasional girlfriend. It was great to have fresh ideas and people join our quests and our campaign. Jeff struggled whenever we had female guests, however. He just could not focus on the game, since he was so creepily focused on them. Girls were not repeat customers as a result. We played Dungeons & Dragons every weekend for 4 to 6 hours, 1 to 2 days a week, for years. In preparation for our gaming sessions, I prepared detailed adventure narratives, character bios and statistic sheets, maps, treasure adventure modules that interlocked into larger world adventures. I used a Naga hide leather mat to draw the map for players as they might see it. Doors, corridors, staircases, tables, chests, and so forth. I used miniature figurines that I hand-painted as monsters and heroes to bring the experience to life and let players visualize where they were in relation to the fictional reality that I had created. My world adventure comprised a multitude of story adventure modules that spanned a massive realm map. It literally took 7 years to complete. Of course, no one ever completes an adventure. They merely have a resting point before their next adventure begins. As an aside, the adventure modules that I used for my computer games, The Tower of Miraglin and Prophecy, The Fall of Trinidon, were actually snapshots from my larger world adventure series of modules that I made for my players playing Dungeons & Dragons. In between Dungeons & Dragons sessions, we would go to Foster City Canals, or to Santa Cruz, Capitola, or Davenport beaches, or any place with beach cliffs that we could play a game that we called Warball. Well, we also called it Pillow Bash and Squirt Gun Wars, the latter being probably the most uncreative but obvious. We even played in Foster City's canals, like I was starting to say. We would put a small couch pillow inside a long pillowcase to act as a medieval flail for close melee combat so we could swing at each other. We would use battery-powered toy Uzi water squirt guns for range attack and surprise attacks. And we would use tennis balls as lives like a video game, where each person would start with 3 tennis ball lives. When someone was hit with a pillow flail or shot with a squirt gun, they were to hand over a tennis ball to the victor. We played on the honor system, and it worked well for us. There was no real danger in the game, outside of the occasional wild, ill-conceived idea of climbing on a beach cliff, or a tree that a person might slip, possibly breaking bones and go in the hospital, maybe even die. Sometimes people took the game maybe too seriously, but it was a great and fun game. While I argued there was no danger to Warball, there was actually another danger: people seeing us and reacting to us playing. One Sunday, we rode up in our 2 cars, a white unmarked van and a supercharged metallic orange-red Toyota T-Top MR2. The van door slid open and out jumped a handful of young men armed with Uzi submachine guns. The MR2 parks next to the van and steps out 2 other men with Uzi submachine guns and pillowcases full of bulky somethings. Yeah, it might look like some paramilitary nut job or terrorist rolled in and were going to shoot up the place or do something crazy. They did not know, no one could know what these crazy people were going to do with pillowcases of stuff and Uzi submachine guns. They didn't know they were toys, or the pillowcases were just full of pillows. They did not know we were just there to play a game on a public beach. No. Inevitably, someone would call the police. We had no idea, of course, as we were busy and deeply engrossed playing our war ball game. The police would eventually scream at us on a megaphone to drop our weapons and come to them slowly and visibly. We complied without hesitation. We were shocked that there were police at all. Thankfully, they did not threaten us or use any weapons. Candidly, it would have made sense if they did, I suppose, since it might have looked like we were armed with semi-automatic weapons. I suppose we were lucky that day and on the second time, which was the last time that it ever happened. Warball was, I guess, dangerous after all. Like most people in life, as they reach adulthood, my childhood and young adult friendships dissolved as they forged new, lighter, less serious friendships with work colleagues and neighbors. I kept in touch long enough to see each of our adventurers find their place in life and set a course for their eventual sunset. Life brings friends, and life takes friends away. Some leave for relationships, some leave for work, some die. Most leave, though, in the end, to pursue something in their lives. It's normal, it's reasonable. In the end, friends leave us all. Mine all moved on without me, and so I moved on without them.